we're back with episode 100, finally. It's been a long time coming, and my guest today is Dave Gawthorn. Many of you will know Dave, but I suppose some of the younger generation might not know. Obviously, Dave goes way back in carp fishing. A bit of an introduction for Dave. He's a DJ, all-round angler, like 2 times BCAC champion, carp angling historian, a writer, and a bit of an innovator. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Don, and I've really been looking forward to guesting on your 100th episode.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but really looking forward to this one. Obviously, we're sat out at the Cotswolds on a beautiful, beautiful July day. It's going to be a scorcher. You've managed to find a bit of shade, which is good. So hopefully we can get a big chunk of this done before the sun comes around. For those that don't know much about you, Dave, I mean, I know I'd love to sort of deep dive into your time on Ashmead Pool. That would be a good place to start. So can you give us a bit of an introduction into that, like how it all began?
Okay, so when I was growing up as a young teenager, I was fortunate to read a book called Quest for Carp by Jack Hilton.
Yeah. And
I borrowed a copy from the local library for the whole duration of my summer holidays. And Redmire Pool and Ashmead Pool were heavily featured amongst the pages within. And both waters really set a dream for me. Not that I ever thought the dream would come true, to fish either one or both of those historic waters.
Yeah, I mean, when was this? Take us back to sort of what year was this? Can you remember?
So this would have been round about 1977, 1978. So carp fishing terms, this was before we had the herring that we all take for granted today.
Yeah. I'd imagine back then there must have been loads of innovation going on, mustn't there?
Well, you had to be an innovator really, Dom, because half the tackle you made, even the rods. I remember building my first set of rods, 10-foot Northwestern SS4s, and going to Jerry's and Wimbledon on their January sale to buy all the components, and then spending the old close season, because we had a close season in those days, building the rods. Buzzers were shot bought and then converted during school design and technology projects. There was nowhere near the myriad of tackle that we've got.
Was that the days of the old king? Was it the Kingfisher with the old the arm rather than the roller? Was that
the heron buzzer?
Heron, yeah.
Yeah, so buzzers for the majority were antennae type buzzers, and the wonderful Optonic, which was a roller buzzer, came out a couple of years previously, but had very low volumes, so people used to convert sounder boxes with GPO speakers to make them loud and have of course a volume control.
Yeah. Nice. So obviously Ashmead Pool, when did that start in terms of when did you get on there?
Okay, so at the time I read Quest for Carp, I used to live in the carp fishing heaven called Surrey. So I had plentiful waters within miles of where I lived. But I've moved to Newport in South Wales in 1989, and that really spawned some information. Where could I fish in the southwest? And I wrote to a few fellow members of the British Carp Study Group, which I was a member of at the time, and 3 or 4 waters came back on letters, and Ashmead Pool featured as one of the waters on every letter. And I'd already applied to go on the waiting list for Ashmead Pool many years ago when I lived in Surrey, because I'd written a letter to Peter Mohan of the BCSG and the Carp Anglers Association at the time. And it was when I moved that I started to become a lot more serious about my application and sort of chased up where I was. And one thing led to another. A gentleman called Alec Welland took over the syndicate at Ashley Pool, so he took over from Peter. And in 1991, my membership came through, and I was fortunate to be one of the 8 members. It's a run on a rota at the time, 4 on, 4 off.
Yeah.
So the dream was well and truly lit.
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't know about Ashley Pool, 'cause obviously the younger generation might not know too much about it. Tell us about like the size of it, the stock, how the fishing worked on there.
Okay, so the lake was run, as I said, on a syndicate basis, and the lake itself was approximately an acre and a quarter in size,
Right.
so quite rectangular in shape, with a house at one end, a bungalow where the owner Tom Groves lived, and that was the deeper end of the pool. And by deep, I'd say probably 4 to 5 foot, and then coming all the way down to the shallows, and the shallows depths would be around about 18 inches to 3 foot.
Yeah.
And then a dogleg bay, which was the deepest area of the pool, which got dug because of the 1976 drought, where the pool nearly dried up. So there was an area of probably 15 metres square dug, and that would be up to 8 or 9 foot deep. The lake itself was gin clear water. You could climb the climbing trees and see every stone and every fleck on the bottom. The surface was covered with lily pads, and the bottom was covered with giant underwater cabbages. And to see the fish swimming around through there, it was like looking at a giant aquarium. Stock wise, there were around about 35-40 fish in the pool.
Right.
And the largest residents were a big leather, Lucky the Leather, Humpy a Mirror, and the Big Common, which was also known as the Redmire Common. But every fish was treasured.
Yeah. I'd imagine, was it like quite a tricky pool on a sort of small, intimate place like that?
Yeah, it was said by many to be very difficult. I would imagine that guys, anglers on there, if you had 10 fish a season, you were doing very well.
Right.
And often some guys would go most of the season with only 2 or 3 bites. It did fish in the winter as well, so that was another good bonus.
Yeah. What do you think the reason that was? Maybe warming up quicker with it being shallower? Or?
Well, it was also it had an inlet from the River Churn, so there was always a constant water changeover going through, and the shallow end, or the dam end as we knew it, would then go on to Little Ashley, and then that would then peter out through the remaining wetlands.
Mm-hmm. So it always had a sort of fresh turnover of water. Yeah. Nice. So I'd love to know about sort of some of your sessions on there. Can you recall any memorable ones? I mean, I know you've I've seen some of the pictures. Yeah, can you recall some of the more memorable ones, or some of the socials that really stuck out for you?
Probably one that really stuck out for me was on my, I think it was on my second rota. I'd been lucky enough to catch a fish on my first rota on a Sunday afternoon, packing up. Only a small one, but an Ashley fish nonetheless, and a dream for me. But I was keen to get back on the second rota, and I arrived straight from work on a Friday evening to see a number of fish up in the shallows cruising around. I'd managed to get some fish taking floaters, including the big leather, and pipped at the post. Along come this big pair of lips and engulfed my bit of balsa wood, my balsa wood hook bait, and I struck only to see the leather spook off, and I was attached to a lovely mirror of 15 or 16 pounds. and the leather disappeared up, bow waved right across the shallows and disappeared up to the deep end. So I took the photographs of the fish, returned it, packed up and put the stalking gear up against a tree for use the following day, and then I proceeded to set up in the deeper end in a swim called number 2. All the swims on Ashley for some reason were known as numbers as opposed to names.
Yeah.
And number 2 was the furthest swim that you could fish before nearest the house. So set up, cast out, and it was 3 rods at the time, but for this particular night I only wanted to fish 2, one literally under my rod top in the near margin, and the other one just up it to the edge of a weed bed to my left. Anyway, time I got sorted out, it was dark, and then literally 3 o'clock in the morning the near margin rod exploded, and straight away I was hooked into a good fish. And after a bit of a tussle through the pads and then the cabbages, scuffled it into the net and put my hand down. I thought, this is a big fish, and looked down, and there it was, lucky the leather at a new PB weight.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely,
Wow.
I mean,
On the second.
on the second road, Fisherman Dreams, I'd seen it on the front cover of CAA magazine with Vic Killings, which was an image which always inspired me, and I'd seen pictures of Kevin Maddox on the front cover of Angling Mail when he caught the Angler's Mail, when he caught it at the lake record 38.4. So to get that fish,
Wow.
I was totally blown away.
How obviously catching a good one like that so early on, did that sort of alter your fishing or your mindset on thereafter? Because did it sort of almost like spoil it, not spoil it, but sort of getting a good result so quick?
Not really. So, funny enough, it was one of the last fish I caught out of the deeper end, because I'd noticed that most of the anglers fished at the deeper end of the pool, which was easier to present your baits and less pads, because it was a sort of more shaded area of the pool. So I'd gone to Ashley to fish Ashley as opposed to gone to Ashley to catch Lucky the Leather or Humpy. Humpy was always the jewel in the crown for me. But it was the fact that you could fish this aquarium type atmosphere, watch the fish's behaviour. I learnt so much fishing in 1 year at Ashley. Gave me sort of decades of experience to watch fish up close and personal, how they would react to baiting situations, rigs, how the carp would communicate with each other. Often if you went out in the punt, the big common would always be the first fish to be circling round the boat, almost like, what are you doing in my territory sort of thing. But digressing, so catching the leather inspired me to move to other areas of the pool which were more weedy, more overgrown, and it was evident to me that the bulk of the fish would travel from the deeps to the shallows during the day, but there was significantly a proportion of fish which were always in the middle ground area, which didn't get fished by really anyone. So I took some of the cabbages home with me on that particular trip, and put them. At the time I had 3 or 4 aquariums, because I used to keep carp to test rigs on, and I had a bait testing tank, and I had one other tank where I put these cabbages, and I took some water lilies as well to cover the surface, and I spent quite a bit of time messing around with leads, trying to, if you like, blast through the vegetation. And I worked out that although the cabbages, when you felt them out of the water, they felt all thick, crispy, actually when they were on the bottom of the pool, they were actually very soft, almost like a lettuce. And I just dropped this sort of 3.5 ounce lead, which was a big lead at the time, and I dropped it through and realised that it just penetrated straight through the lettuce. Excuse me.
Don't forget your tea as well.
So after a little bit more experimenting, I then thought that rather than fish the clearer areas where they're more obvious,
Yeah.
I could then start fishing the much smaller holes in the pad, sometimes only 6 inches, 12 inches round.
Mm-hmm.
So close in, I could drop it, literally lower it off the rod top or an underarm flick, and the longer distance, which would be, if you like, the middle of the pool, would only be a 20-yard cast, and by a bit of leading around, I could get gaps in the pads to be lengthways in front of me, so it was quite easy to plop these leads. And interestingly enough, although it was only close range fishing, I was fishing a helicopter setup, so I'd have a 3 or even a 4 ounce lead and a very short hook length, 4 to 6 inch of the time Criston multi-strand.
Oh yeah.
And then I have a size 4 drilling star point, and most of the fish I caught were on bottom baits, but I would experiment every rotor if I had the opportunity to watch the fish's reaction on the rigs.
Yeah. There's a few points we sort of glazed over there that I'd like to bring up as well. Obviously your attention to detail is one that sort of stands out. You just sort of glazed over about having tanks set up at home with carp in to test rigs and baits. I mean, that's pretty high level testing and sort of prep work. Has that always been a part of your angling? I mean, you come across like a detail guy anyway, so has that always been what you feel has given you a bit of an edge, like your sheer level to the attention to detail?
Yeah, I spend a lot of work even today on doing my homework, and I've always been the same in my fishing. So swim preparation, make it. We have a plethora of decent rigs available, and obviously sharp hooks available to us these days, which weren't available. So coming as a child from the 80s and carp fishing, there wasn't lots of books, there wasn't any media that we have today, so you had to learn yourself, and because the sport itself was the polar opposite of today, where carp are the go-to species for most anglers. Back in the days that I started, it was uncommon to see a carp angler, and often they wouldn't speak to you. They're very secretive. You go to their swim and they'd zip their bivvy door down, all sorts of things. So, you had to be able to learn, experiment, and obviously we had a little bit of literature, and that all changed when Carp Fever came out by Kevin Maddox, which was the Bible for many of us at the time, along with Rod Hutchinson's Carp Strikes Back. They were the two books really that sort of opened things up and paved the way. But yeah, I spend lots of time on preparation, whether it be my tackle or more these days, because most of my carp fishing is on lower stocked gravel pits. I will spend weeks, sometimes months, preparing a spot or a swim, or invariably multiple spots or 2 or 3 swims by baiting. I do a lot of raking with castable reed wakes. We'll often prepare a spot for months, 3 or 4 months is nothing unusual for me before I even cast a line. So yeah, I've always been keen, and I have a good eye for detail.
Yeah. Where's that come from, would you say? If you've always been like that from young? I mean, through work? Is it just like something you've picked up from a parent, or like where did it come from?
I come from a fishing background where none of my family fish or have ever fished.
Yeah.
So I started angling when I was 5 years old on the local river, and it was 2 years, I think, before I even caught a fish. But I had a fascination with water and the study of the water and what you could see, the life beneath the surface was always a fascination. And I learnt on my own at the time, which is why it probably took me 2 years to catch something. And my first proper fish, which was a 3 or 4 inch roach, which was a monster. You know? And to this day, although I do fish for large fish of many different species, I'm not always driven in my carp fishing for a 50 pounder or a 40 pounder. I like to fish decent venues with decent fish, with decent anglers, as opposed to being driven all the time by a weight.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I completely get that. How does it make you feel? So you said it took you like 2 years to catch your first fish. You know, you mentioned obviously there was no media back then, no social media, not really any regular magazines or anything like that as such. Sort of, how does it make you feel when you see people? You know, I mean, I know it's the way of the world, and everyone wants something for nothing. You know, they want to instantly be able to do it. What are your views on that? And you see people asking like which swims are good, you know, what bait, what rigs, you know, how many wraps.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always help anglers, and I think it's always good. And I can remember when I started, I was, you know, where I could get an angler to divulge information, I would be probably punishing him, you know, because I had such a desire to learn about my quarry, the venues I was fishing. At the time, I was too young to drive, so it was a cycle journey to the lake 3 or 4 times a week after school, and then my father would drop my gear off on the weekend. I'd spend the weekend there. So I think the difference is these days is everyone wants everything on a plate, but I'd always say if you fish the same as everyone else, you'll catch the same as everyone else. So try to be different in your angling. You know, if there's always one go-to spot in a particular swim, then maybe just try and find your own area. That with maybe an alternate rod, or just if you can be different, you know, if everyone uses 7-inch hook links, try a 6.5 or a 7.5. That half inch can make a difference, you know. Try and be adaptive in your fishing, but I can't knock anyone for asking and, you know, for information. Really, that's the best way. It can be a little bit confusing these days because there is so much information.
It's almost like a backward step, isn't it? You can be baffled. If you follow what everyone says, there's so much conflicting info. But if we sort of go back to Ashley, so obviously you'd had Lucky, and then you were talking about how your rig sat in the cabbages.
Okay, so my next 2 rotors, fishing in a new area of the pool, fishing in much smaller gaps. You know, in fact, once you'd sort of cast out or placed your bait in the near margin, your line would literally be going through. You couldn't even see the gaps, but of course underneath the canopy was much better, and I was baiting very heavily, so I was using fish meal boilies at the time, and I would take a couple of pound mixes with me that I'd rolled during the week, and then I'd take base mix with me and eggs, and then roll on the bank a couple of mixes whilst I was there. But it was in the near margins where the real observations come. And on my 3rd rotor, I was fishing a critically balanced pop-up on a hook link of about 10-11 inches, very soft, and I noticed one of the bigger fish in the pool, a fish called humpy, which was probably the hardest fish to come out, and at least often visitors to the bank. And he literally came in. I thought he was going to come straight in towards the hook bait, and as he come over the hook bait, he rolled on his flank and created this big vacuum of water, and immediately turned around, and to see my pop up just sort of spinning and raising almost like being in a mini whirlpool, for want of an expression, and the fish just sort of sat there, looked at it, and didn't spook, which is what I expected to happen. It just slowly sauntered off and never came back to that area again.
But how valuable was that, witnessing that?
It was, because it also led me. So the following week at home, I was thinking, a light, critically balanced pop-up isn't the way to go. So an overweighted one. So I came up with this. I called it the caterpillar rig, where I put 6 BB shot all in a line together, an inch below the hook.
Right.
And the idea bit, so I put it in my aquarium at home and had a little play with it, and had a tube to suck it up, and I noticed that as the bait would lift, each shot would come up, so it was a variable weight.
Right.
And it was overweighted, and if the fish came in and hooked itself, the weight as it lifted up would become more, till it lifted the shot off the bottom. So it looked ridiculous, but it was definitely clearly different. And I took it down, and on the Saturday afternoon I managed to lay it in the margin crossways, literally 6 inches from the bank, and then I had a backland further up which was made of plasticine, and then the rod tip was literally on the bank. And I was there, and I was up the tree, and in came another common, what we called the fat common, which was a 20 pounder, and he come in, and he literally comes straight in, done the same, rolled on the flank and turned around. The bait didn't move at all. It was pinned to the bottom, and literally just come straight in. As I saw the big mouth go over the top, saw the hook bait, next thing the rod tip, and it's just shot across the grass. And I caught that one. And that was on the Saturday afternoon. And between the Saturday afternoon and the Sunday evening when I packed up, I had another 4 further chances, all on that pop-up rig. So clearly thinking outside the box and coming up with something that was different to what the fish were used to, trick them up. But that led me really to dispensing with pop-ups altogether and going on to bottom baits, and actually making my hook baits heavier, so that my bottom baits were overweighted. At the time there was no ready-mades available, so Richworth were available, but I was using fish meals at the time, which weren't available. And I was using to make the baits heavier, I was adding limestone flour and blue clay powder, so the hook baits actually felt like marbles in your hand, with the idea being bait heavily, very small areas, and then the hook bait being very, and that was my go-to method really for, all the way into winter, really.
How did you discover that was the way to make them heavier? I mean, because again, I imagine there wasn't much literature out there.
No, I'd come across limestone flour in an article by a friend of mine, John Carver. And John was doing a series of articles on long-range fishing, and he'd mentioned about making his baits heavier with limestone flour to go through the throwing stick. So he was using 24mm baits at the time, and these large baits, so I picked up from there and sort of added it into my own fishing.
Yeah. Brilliant. And it's again, see little things like that you're open to noting. Just ping like little that starts the like the old cogs whirring. And what about the was it the blue clay?
Yes,
Is that the same thing as well? Do you add that?
Yeah, I'd started then to look at what ingredients were heavy.
Yeah.
And come across clay powders. I'd read some literature as well that they were used in the koi industry, so I thought, oh, okay, so carp may well like clay, and again, 20 years, 30 years on, we know how fish will actively seek out clay for the minerals contents in pits. So that was how the blue clay powder come around.
Yeah, brilliant. So you said you had 4 more chances. Talk us through those. Did you land them, or did?
No, I landed all the fish.
Yeah.
So I was confident that fishing the weedier areas, using strong tackle. So I was on 15-pound. Big game was my main line, and I say Kristen multi-strand, which I think was 25-pound, size 4 Drennan Continental star point hooks. So. Yeah, quite an unusual mixed match, but everything was bulletproof tackle. I never had any line breakages all the time I was on the pool. No hook link breakages.
Yeah.
I landed all the other 4 fish. I think there was another 20-pounder. There was, because I remember getting a photograph of taking that. Actually, I was there with my camera equipment and literally leaning over the edge, and I've got a slide of a 23 picking up the hook bait while I took the photographs. That was nice.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. I suppose stuff like that's commonplace, but back then, I mean, there was very few, if any, shots of that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was.
Wow.
Just something nice to photograph.
I bet the heart was in your mouth at that point as well, because it's in the moment. Obviously, I mean, we're both really into our photography, but taking a nice static photo is one thing, but for getting a shot like that in focus at the right point without any obstructions, trying to remain calm at the same time.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much going on. Wow, that must have been some buzz.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you've got a slide of that.
Yeah. I've got a slide of that.
Wow, yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So how did the rest of your season there pan out?
So I progressed really from, I knew the bait was working. I knew that by pre-baiting the results would increase. So I would do a midweek baiting trip on my rotor. So the rotor would start on Monday morning and finish the following Monday morning. So I would really be fishing at the end of my rotor, being the weekend.
Yeah.
So I would do a midweek baiting up trip, which was 120 miles round trip for me, just to go down to bait up during the week. Hopefully, no one would be there. If there was, of course, that baiting trip would be rendered cancelled.
Yeah.
But I'd started to, rather than focus on just the one swim, there was 3 swims which were targeting this middle area. So I'd always bait the swim I was intending to fish, but also bait one of the other swims and leave that for a couple of weeks, just so that there would never be a line in the water.
Right.
The following 6 or 8 weeks fishing took me into winter. I know I caught, I think I had another 10 carp. I had quite a few. I caught lucky again, and I was fortunate enough to catch humpy. In fact, one Sunday afternoon I caught lucky on the Saturday night. Lost the common, the Redmire common, mid-afternoon, and then I sort of packed up, and then I walked around one last time, and I spotted two of the smallest fish in the pool, feeding on one of my areas, and I called these fish Humpy's bodyguards because I'd noticed that quite often the Humpy would swim around with these two small fish, let the small fish feed in, and then he'd come in and clear it. And sure enough, just out the corner of my eye, 2 metres behind the bush, I spotted Humpy coming through, and sure enough, he come in and pushed these other two fish away and started feeding. In fact, he demolished all the food. So I climbed up the tree, waited for Humpy to swim off, and then come back down, put another 20 baits in, went and grabbed the car, rod from the car, and come back, and that evening, I caught Humpy, which was just absolutely amazing carp, jet black, fought like a demon.
Was that same rig again, the same, or did you adapt it?
No, I'd moved from the pop-ups then to the bottom baits with the heavily overweighted bottom baits.
Yeah, wow. Would you say that's your standout catch on there, or was it always lucky for you?
That day was probably my best day on that Sunday, but I was quite successful in the winter, and I caught lucky again a week before Christmas, and then Boxing Day I caught Humpy, so to catch both of them in their winter colours as well. So that really ended my first season on there.
Right.
Really.
Wow, what a season.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Just
nice. Where'd you go? Obviously, where'd you go after a season like that? Were you back for more next season, or did you?
I did, because the fish that I really wanted to, or the three fish that I'd always, if you like, had as loose targets were Humpy, Lucky, and the common, the big common, or the Redmire common, and it was known as the Redmire common because it was a gift from the Redmire syndicate.
Right.
And at that time, I thought that I would never ever get the opportunity to fish Redmire, so catching a Redmire fish from somewhere else was as good as it gets. But once I'd completed my first season on Ashley, I'd virtually caught every fish, I think, bar 3, and one of those was the Redmire common. So the following year, I did fish Ashley, but nowhere near the time effort that I put in the previous year, and I caught a lot less fish because of that. I didn't catch the common, and then a couple of years later, John Baker made a video to Ashley Pool and for the first week of the season, and I happened to be on the water at the same time, and I managed on the opening day of the season. I was fortunate to catch Humpy yet again. On the second day of the season, I caught Lucky, and then on the third day of the season, in the early hours, I sat up all night in a rainstorm with just my bed chair, no brolly. The swimmers couldn't even get a brolly in, and literally for 4 o'clock in the morning, the rod tore off, and it was the Redmire common. So that was the last time I ever cast a line in Ashley Pool, although I continued to run it as syndicate leader till its demise in 2010.
Right, wow. That's some story, mate. And obviously, like a bit of a sad demise, wasn't it? With was it the otters that ended up?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, very difficult time. Otters weren't really known to the extent they are these days.
Yeah.
Very difficult time for both myself and my fellow syndicate members.
Yeah. I suppose obviously with that, the stream, the River Churn, I suppose it's prime for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, but again, you don't realise things which you look at in hindsight, and we know a lot about otter behaviour
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah. Definitely. God, what a shame. So where did your fishing take you after that?
Well, I was fishing. At the time, I was also a member of Horseshoe and the Gloucestershire Syndicate, Frampton upon Severn.
Yeah.
I'd been a member there since the late 80s, and I spent quite a lot of time on Horseshoe. Again, Sunday afternoons after fishing other venues, I would go to Horseshoe because again you could observe fish very close in, and I could watch fish's behaviour, mess around again with rigs. I had a lot of fish at the time very close in, like a rod length in, and I was fishing hemp seed baits, so super glue hemp seed on a bit of cork, and then I'd have a hair made out of fuse wire, and I'd literally just fish that over beds of hemp.
Yeah.
And that was very successful. On a Sunday afternoon or evening, I'd catch anywhere between 10 and 15 fish in a session. There'd be nearly always doubles. A 20 pounder was unheard of really at that time.
Yeah.
Or certainly very, very rare.
And what year was that, did you say?
So that would be 91, 92 ish, just as the Amy Roadstone at the time run it, and it was just coming into the changeover where the Carp Society gained control.
Yeah.
So Horseshoe was also halfway house between where I lived in Wales and where I came from in Surrey. So my Surrey buddies used to meet up with me 3 or 4 times a year. We'd have a sort of social fishing, but then I'd go back to my normal sort of slow big fish angling.
Yeah, nice. And break it up a bit. And obviously, I suppose Horseshoe at that time was slowly starting to approach its prime, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Well, I think I had a 20 pounder, which was 20 pound fully scaled, which was, I believe, to be the first 20 pounder under the Carp Society's control.
Right.
And that fish became, I think, a 40 pounder called Patch in later years.
Yeah, wow.
So once I got the 20 pounder, that was really my sort of ambition achieved. So I started fishing there less and fished other waters local, but over the next decade, Horseshoe became really massive great fishery, lots of 30 pounders and beautiful fish as well.
Yeah.
And it's great today to see the place 30 years on under the Carp Society's control, and it's looking like it as good, and I'm sure it will prosper and be an even better venue.
Yeah.
And it's just a great place.
Yeah, those fish are creeping up in weight, aren't they? Yeah, such a stunning place to fish as well, isn't it? It's got a bit of everything, hasn't it, on there?
And I can remember when I first saw some of the fully scaled fish in there. They were just incredible fish, And in fact, there's many waters that over the years ended up with Horseshoe fish being in there that have grown on to big weights. If you look at Stoneacres at Lynch Hill, that was part and parcel to an Amy Roadstone stocking, back in the day of some of those fish.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they're incredible, weren't they? Stoneacres fish still are. Yeah. Got to be some of the best looking fish around, haven't they? Big, dark, scaly, and they scrap, don't they, as well? Yeah. I remember hooking on Horseshoe years ago, and the fight, it was just, it was like you're just sort of hanging on.
Yes.
Yeah. Hell of a water. I mean, like I say, I think a few more years and it's going to be right back up there, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Looks very promising. Yeah. Yeah, I would like a ticket on there actually. It's so close to me. So obviously you mentioned France. I suppose you can't talk. Can you talk about that or not?
Not really.
No.
It's
Yeah.
no publicity.
Yeah, it's a bit
So
quiet, yeah.
as most of my
Yeah.
waters are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, understood.
But no, I spent probably 15 plus years
Right.
fishing there continually
Yeah.
before coming back down the water park in 2014.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Lovely. Spoiled around here, really, aren't we? I think.
Yeah.
With some of the waters. Also, if we sort of branch off a bit and talk about sort of maybe like your the BCAC stuff,
Okay.
that would be quite good, and talk us through those events. When what? When did the surface now, mate? Are we going past?
Oh.
What's that? Yeah, so sorry, something got distracted by something. Someone passed the rod tips then. So yeah, BCAC. What about that? Talk us through those events.
Okay, so at the time I was, which was 1990, late 90s,
Yeah.
1999, sort of 2000, I wasn't doing as much carp fishing. I was spending a lot more time fishing for other species, big fish, rudd,
Yeah.
roach, chub, barbel, eels and such like. So I weren't doing as much carp fishing, and then an opportunity came to me via my friend Brian Jarrett to partner him in the British Carpet Angling Championships
Yeah.
for a qualifier at Penn's Hall in Birmingham.
Right.
And I'd actually done a tiny bit of carp match fishing years ago in 1994 when the Sony Carp Challenge started,
Right.
and I entered that because I thought it was great that a company like Sony had chosen to sponsor angling, and particularly carp fishing, as opposed to you think they could have chosen any other sport, rugby, cricket, football, etc.
Yeah.
And they chose carp fishing. So myself, along with quite a few others, Martin Locke, Lee Jackson, Paul Forward, to name but a few, decided that, you know, that's in for a penny, in for a pound. Unfortunately, the Sony event didn't last further than 1 year,
Right.
and we mentioned Horseshoe earlier, but that's where the first final was,
Right.
and it was a £10,000 prize, and there was one carp caught, which was Tim Hodges. He won,
Right.
but Tim was a friend of ours, and we'd all actually, 6 of us, had said that if we won it, we would share the money. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it was my most profitable leg I think I've ever had. But yeah, it was a great day.
Yeah.
So then fast forward, I never saw myself into that sort of fishing ever again, if I'm honest. But yeah, Brian offered me, and at the time I was trying to raise some cash to have my son diagnosed privately, because I suspected he might be autistic.
Right.
So I needed to raise quite a bit of money to go private. So I thought having a go at this competition might be a way to raise money.
Yeah.
So prepared for it, found out all about the venue, Penn's Hall, went and practised, found out about the people that were in the qualifier, Kev Knight, Rob Tuff, what their strengths were, how they fished, etc. And again, good opportunity once we drawn our peg. It wasn't our favourite peg, I don't recall, but I noticed that everyone fished over onto the far bank, so I'd said to Brian that I was going to bait the margins and leave that. So I did that for the best part of 24 hours without casting a bait, and we'd caught a couple of fish each, the pair of us, and then I put the margin rod in, and that night it went off, and it was the biggest mirror in the lake, and that with a couple more that we caught were enough to win the qualifier.
Right.
So that catapulted us then to the final, which was at Dovecot Lake in Milton Keynes.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the year 2000, and a star-studded field. I suppose you want to say all the top match guys were there. You know, all guys I respected: Pete Holhouse, Ian Huntington, Chris Rosen, Steve Spurgeon, Rob Tuff, Kev Knight, and you know those many other household names at the time in the carp fishing scene. And most of these guys, you know, used to fish the British Champs every year.
Right.
But it was a very enjoyable event. All of the matches I fished for that were. But yes, it was not a lake which was really heavily stocked, and had a bit of a plan that we need sort of 5, maybe 6 fish to win. So that would dictate an approach. You know that your baiting wasn't for multiple hits, etc. And I think Brian and myself, we caught one apiece. Going into Saturday night, we were in second place, and then I was on. We come out very late in the draw, I think about 23rd or 24th, but actually got our first choice, and it was a swim. There was no fishing on the far bank, and it tapered into a bay, and to our left was the end peg. And funny, I think one of the guys, successful guys today, Wayne Mansford, he was in the swim to our left in this bay. Yeah. But the far bank margin went from probably 160 yards out on the right hand side of the swim to 125, 130 yards on the left hand of the swim. So I could just probably cast that 125, 130. Right. And on the Saturday evening, I saw a fish roll literally out in front of this bush at 125 yards range. And I wound in a rod, put a really over-flavoured squid and octopus single pop-up on, whacked it out, and it landed literally in the rings of this fish. And literally 5 minutes later, hadn't passed, and melted off and got it in the net, and that took us into the lead by I think £1 or £2, very small weight. And we sat there all night, all through the next day, and Chris and Steve never had another bite, and we won.
Wow!
So that was my start of carp match fishing, I suppose. Which sort of then led really to 5-6 years of spending a lot of time in the BCAC. So the following year defended the title, didn't win, and then started to qualify again, qualified, and then won again at Thurston Lake in the mid-2000s, and that ended up me fishing for England along with Brian. We got selected for England, so we went to Moscow, fished against Russia. Lots of time. All my time, all my holidays were now spent really on the carp match fishing scene, and I was evident that it wasn't really. People would know me as a match angler, and that wasn't really what I was about. I was really a big fish angler, and not really into catching lots of fish, if I'm honest. So, but I wouldn't swap out any of those times. And I look at the trophies in my trophy cabinet, and see British champion twice, and see some of my England medals. and the people I fish with, and learned lots as well. And did learn a lot through the match fishing, how bait application, colour of bait, just changing from a yellow pop-up to a purple one. On some days we'll get your bites. Obviously the zig fishing, and the early spotting over zigs wasn't even around at that time, and I'm proud that along with Brian that we developed that method. I've certainly never seen it used prior to us using it.
Right.
But slowly but surely I wanted to sort of weed my way out of the competition side of fishing, because it was just taking all of my holidays. I had no time for anything else at all. Even the family holidays were parked during those years.
Yeah, I suppose the level of prep as well that you go.
Yeah.
That just absolutely eats into everything.
And you're going to win.
Yeah.
I've always gone to win. I've never ever gone to win, and I always do so much homework about the venues. Hours on Google Maps, measuring a venue out, recording. Even before I went to practice at a venue, but with Google Maps and the measuring tool, you could find out how far an island was. That would dictate you took your long range gear, so you could turn up to a venue for the very first time, having not even seen it, with armed with maybe 2 trips worth of information already.
Brilliant. Yeah, and again, obviously, it's just about that being switched on and sort of innovative and just thinking outside. I suppose you have to at that level with some of the guys you're against.
Oh, absolutely. And these guys, this is what they do. It was. But I'd always watch. I'd always be the first to congratulate the winners, and I really enjoyed the camaraderie in the events, and it would be all serious while the match, and particularly the pre-draw, but afterwards everyone would sort of open up a bit, and I've still got lots of friends today that I speak to, and you look at people's strengths and take little bits into your angling, and I'm a very open-minded angler as well, very open-minded to take things that I see and either adapt them or into my own fishing,
and that's what it's all about, isn't it? Knowing, I think, fishing without ego, knowing that you can learn from others. It's like anything in life, isn't it? It's how you progress, isn't it, and get better. I think that's so important, being open to learn. Because it's what improves, isn't it? Those little, which I think, like just what I've gleaned from just this chat, now we're only like an hour in, but the little like percentages here and there that you add into yours and all the prep stuff that just nudges you that little bit further ahead. So important. Again, it's the same thing for anything in life, isn't it?
My theory and my goal going into a match was the only thing left to chance is the weather and the draw. That was the level of I set my own goals, my personal goals.
I'd imagine it must have been very stressful. Especially when they say when you've got that, when you had that aim to raise the money for your boy's diagnosis as well. That must the stress levels must have been.
It was, but I never made that sort of public to anyone. That was just to myself. I didn't want to anyone at the time to know really about having to go down that route. And in my head, the private diagnosis didn't sit well for money anyway. How can you wait 2 or 3 years, yet money always counts, that didn't.
How is your boy now? I saw the picture of him graduating, was it? You shared? He's
Luke, my son. I'm very, very proud of him and what he's already accomplished as a young man. He's very bright. He's currently studying for a degree at Bath University, and he's having a year out at the moment on an internship with Zurich Insurance. And he's doing very well, and he's just been awarded one of 2 finance graduate positions for 2023. So he's very pleased, and I'm doubly so. Very proud of what he's achieved, and the hard work that he and his family have done to help him along his way.
Yeah, that's brilliant to hear. And I remember sort of speaking to you about him last time. Yeah, it's so good to hear, see that he's thriving. 'Cause I mean, that must have been hard growing up, and especially because sort of it's only more in the sort of forefront of people's minds now, isn't it? Like in terms of like the mental health, autism, OCD, and OCD. Like my ex-partner has severe OCD.
Yeah.
It's the same thing on the spectrum somewhere, and it's a big thing, isn't it? And especially when not knowing initially what it could have been, it must have been quite tricky.
Oh, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I was worried that my son wouldn't be able to read and write, talk properly, and to see him blossom. And I'm a great believer that help is out there, and I am a go-get type of character. I pushed through lots of obstacles to get him seen to, and some very difficult challenges, for us to get where he's got today.
Yeah, it's well deserved, and beautiful to see. I'd like to see the picture because he's an avid runner as well. Isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's an avid 800 metre runner.
Yeah.
So he trains for Newport Harriers,
Right.
And Bath. So 800 and 1500 metres are his forte. So he's trying to get under the 2-minute barrier, which is about a second away, I think, off his PB. So
Crikey. I always remember back at school, like dreading doing the 1500, being one of the bigger kids. Rugby was my thing. It's not long distance now, is it? So is it nearly 4 laps?
Yeah.
But back then it was like, what, 1500 metres? Yeah. That all cross country. God, he sounds like he's really going for it. And like I say, it comes across just how proud you are.
Yeah.
What a brilliant story. I'd like to just sort of as well, because obviously we're both really keen photographers.
Yeah.
To spend a bit of time on photography.
Yeah, no worries.
Because obviously it seems to go sort of hand in hand, doesn't it? The angling and the photography, because we're sat here quiet in nature. It's not very often, and it doesn't feel like we're waiting for something to happen. Things just come to us, don't they? And you'll have the camera next to you. Where did that all start for you, Dave, the photography?
Well, again, as a young angler, I was inspired by the black and white photography from a guy called Bill Quinlan, one of Jack Hilton's angling colleagues, and seeing these black and white shots in Angler's Mail, Angling Times, and indeed Quest for Carp, just really set the photography journey with me. Good quality photographs have always inspired me, and photography back then was very hard to. It was back in the days of film, so it was pre-digital. You if you wanted to take good photographs, you had to learn by your mistakes.
Right.
So I had on one side inspiration to take good photographs, and just going back to those black and white images as well, they also were the very images that inspired me and set a dream to be able to, not that I thought it would ever be achieved, but we can talk about that later, catch a 20-pound common carp from Redmire. But I was always inspired on Jack Hilton's front cover shot on Quest for Carp, which happened to be Bill Quinlan. And Bill used to take these photographs and develop them in his bath, his mother's bath, and so a good person to look up to and learn along the way.
Yeah.
So I purchased my first SLR camera back in early 80s, 1980 I think it was.
What was the model?
A Pentax ME Super, so it was semi-automatic, and used to take prints, used to take lots of photographs, but it was quite an expensive thing, photography really at those days, because with any photography, the more pictures you take, the better you become, and also you learn things along the way. And the transition then from to quality was I'd seen in the early days of the Carp Society, in fact, issue 1 of the Carp Society's magazine Carp Fisher was a picture of a guy called Mike Wilson with a Savay carp. Incredible quality photograph, therein, and that inspired me as well. That great pictures, they stick in your mind, and that inspired me to have a go at Savay Lake and find out about Savay Lake. But more importantly, I noted when I found out a bit more about Mike Wilson, he was an all-round angler, and he had fantastic photographs of every species you could think of. That he was shooting what's called 2 1/4 transparency at the time, so if you like, your image was 2 1/4 square,
right.
Whereas I was on 35mm.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to go down the route of 2 1/4 square cameras, but I did start to transcend into colour transparency or slide film, which was a lot more difficult to get the exposure right, because it didn't have the latitude of print film. But again, it managed me to, through experience and wanting to get better, to start to understand, and slowly but surely I became more proficient at taking photographs and also selling photographs.
Right.
At the time, to like the angling weeklies, because they used to pay for all your photographs at the time. So you get £30 or front cover, you get £50, and then I'd invest that into more equipment. So my equipment got better, my photographs got better. I used to also do a bit for the magazines at the time, not the carp magazines I had, but I used to do a lot of photographs for a magazine called Practical Course Fishing.
Oh yeah.
And again, all my money would be invested back into equipment.
Nice. And what sort of era was that into, and how far off digital were we?
Okay, so we're talking now mid 80s till probably early 2000s.
Right.
So I had an unfortunate incident really that changed. I was defending my second title along with Brian for the BCAC at a lake called Thurston Lakes, which is where we'd won previously. And whilst I was doing a television interview with Sky, I believe it was, somebody broke into my car and took all of my photography equipment.
Oh God.
And unusually I wouldn't have had all my equipment, but this particular weekend I was actually training a couple of younger anglers who wanted to improve their photography, so I had all my equipment. So I lost all of my equipment. So two SLR cameras and 9 or 10 lenses. Never got any of the equipment back. Insurance payout, because it was in the car, was very low, and all of a sudden I was left without a camera. So I purchased at the time a Canon compact digital, G6 off memory. So that gave me my insight into digital photography. But as always, the devil in the detail, and my eye for detail and my want for quality was what drove me spending more money, more equipment. And I had in my eyes and in my head the images that I had on slide film, and they really just weren't there at the time, digitally. The plus side, of course, was you could take a photograph you could see the quality of the photograph. You could see whether you chopped the fish's tail off.
Yeah.
You didn't have to wait
Yeah.
sometimes weeks for your images to come back. So it was instant.
Yeah.
So it took me probably...
Go on, Karen. Is it a biplane or something? Yeah, it's a plane. Sounds like a helicopter.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? It's a plane. Yeah. I know it's one and the other. Yeah. Yeah. I know both. Yeah.
we're-
Chopper over there and a plane over there.
We're in
Yeah.
the middle of air control, I think.
Yeah.
So, so moving back into digital photography, I could embrace it, but the quality
Yeah.
really just wasn't what I was used to.
How many megapixels were we talking
Um,
then? Can you remember?
So I think my G6, I'm going to guess here, was something like 12 million megapixel.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it gave me the insight to, again, go and learn a new type of photography,
Yeah.
understand what megapixels were and what they meant, and also that just changing the camera for one that from, let's say, 12 megapixel to 15
Yeah.
didn't actually guarantee you better images. And still to this day I've sort of gone along those rules.
Right.
And cameras now have come a long way,
Yeah.
and digital is as good, if not better, than the days of film, albeit the oldie world filmy look can't be replicated exactly with digital, and there's a common theme at the moment where people are shooting film again.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Everything comes full circle, doesn't it?
But yeah, I shoot a DSLR these days.
Yeah.
I would never go back, and yeah, if I have a few tips really. Try and nail your exposure in camera as best you could. Don't be one of these people that think that I can always adjust it in Lightroom or always compensate in Photoshop.
Yeah. You can't if you've gone over, can you? For sure.
No. My ground is try and get a great photo in camera, or a good photo in camera. Learn how to use your histogram. That's that chart at the back that looks like a mountain range.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understand what that means. Have a look on YouTube, because that is such a good barometer of how good your exposure is.
Why don't you talk us through that briefly before you go on to your next tip? 'Cause there'll be many people that don't have a clue about that. So give us. I know it's a very, very complex subject, or can be.
Okay.
Try and give us like a quick synopsis of it, so people can sort of learn.
Right. Okay.
I know that's a whole episode on its own.
Okay, so in basic terms, guys and girls, so your histogram, if you look on left to right, on the left hand side is all your shadow detail, and on your right hand side is all your highlight detail, and then looking from bottom to the top is the amount of detail. So if you took a photograph in deep shadow, you would end up with your mountain, for want of a better expression, would be all to the left hand side and up to the top.
Yeah.
And the bottom of the curve, the histogram curve, would stop somewhere a third in, let's say. And if you took a photograph of a paving slab, which is quite grey, you would actually end up with a bar in the middle, set in the middle, going up to the top. So denoting that it's got all of the mid-tones.
Right.
Okay, so what you're aiming for is ideally your histogram curve covers all or as much of the baseline as possible without being too high at the top, either in your shadows or your highlights. Particularly with your highlights, you can end up what's called blowing your images, and those blown highlights are not recoverable
Yeah.
in any software at all.
Right.
Okay, so you're really looking at a nice hill-shaped pattern that goes from all the way to the left to all the way to the right.
Yeah.
Okay, so further information, I'll say go on YouTube, but it's definitely a tool that's worth understanding, because you can literally look at it and know that you've nailed your exposure.
Yeah.
Also, another handy feature on a lot of cameras that people don't realise there, you have an ability to enable a highlight alert, and its factory default settings on your camera will be disabled.
Yeah.
But what it does is, if you take a photograph and look at your image, any parts where the highlight is blown out, so maybe in your face, they will flash black.
Yeah.
You'll see them constantly flash, and people call it the blinkies.
Yeah.
And that is telling you that you, in those areas where it's flashing black, you've blown out the highlights already, so bring your exposure down to compensate for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, try and get your image as good in camera,
Yeah.
and then when you go to your post editing, either your Lightroom, Photoshop, or both,
Yeah.
the industry standards, you
Yeah.
can go from a good photo and make it pop into a great photograph.
Right. Brilliant.
Without too much trouble.
Yeah. That's a really good summary. Really good, and I think people take a lot from that. Could you, while we're talking about exposure, and obviously nailing exposure in camera, can you discuss and sort of explain for those that have maybe got their camera and looking to switch to full manual, like the relation of aperture, shutter speed, ISO? Talk to us a bit about that, because that'd be a good insight as well.
Okay.
I think.
So exposure is really governed by two things: how much light you let in, and how long you let the light in for.
Yeah.
So how much light is controlled by your aperture or your f-stop, and how long for is governed by your shutter speed. So for a normal daylight cat shot, you need if you're handheld, you need a shutter speed of at least 1/60th of a second, and that depends on your lens. So we're talking now a standard 50mm fixed lens, or if you're using a zoom, which many of the listeners will probably have, is set it to around 50mm.
Yeah, and that's based on a full frame, as opposed to a crop sensor.
That's right.
Yeah.
So your shutter speed is governed by, so always go for a 50mm lens. Use a rule of thumb as 1/50th of a second is your minimum handheld shutter speed.
Yeah.
Okay. So aperture wise, again, aperture is controlled by your lens. So your maximum or your widest aperture will often be on kit zoom lenses, say f3.5 or f4.5, and you go to a smaller aperture, which will be f16, f22, etc. And smaller apertures reduce your light. For a typical sunny day cat shot, I would be selecting an aperture around about 5.6, 6.3.
And what's your reason for that?
Okay, which will give a level of depth of field. So depth of field is the area of focus in front and behind your subject, and that's only controlled by one thing, which is your aperture. So your wider your aperture or smaller your aperture gives you a lesser depth of field, and a smaller, higher number aperture will give you a larger depth of field. So depth of field is the area from the front focus point, or the area from your front to your back. So if you're taking fish shots, 5.6 or f6.3 will give you approximately your fish and your face will be in focus.
Yeah.
If you narrow it down, you might just have the fish and a blurry background. If you took the same images at f1.4, if your camera lens allowed you to go down all that wide. So yeah, for most of my cat shots, I start at base point around about 5.6 or 6.3, corresponding shutter speed. And if you're struggling to get those, then increase your ISO, which in old days is your film speed, to match those settings.
Yeah. And what does ISO do on a modern day digital
Okay, so
camera?
So again, start with the smallest ISO you can, ideally 200 for daylight shots and 400 for nighttime shots, which I'll come to in a second. The danger with ISO is as you up your ISO 400, 800, 1600, etc., you start to bring what's called image noise, which are electrons into your image.
Right.
And that creates like pixelated, distracted
Like grain.
And the darker the image, and so at night you'll see more grain, and that's why people choose to use full frame cameras as opposed to crop sensor cameras, because they handle less image noise by default because they have a bigger sensor.
Right, got it. Okay, so marrying those three together, and obviously typically a fish picture is going to be reasonably static, isn't it? So that's why you mentioned about the shutter speed. Obviously, just give us a very quick. I know again it's a potentially massive subject, but just to give us a quick overview of how the three would work together as well. Just obviously, because with movement.
Okay, so we'll go fully manual. We'll choose a shutter speed of f5.6, and we're going to choose a shutter speed of 1/60th. So this is on a full frame body and a 50mm lens. Okay.
Yeah.
When we so we have to press the button, take a exposure meter, and for this example, we've got ISO 100. When we look at the metering bar at the bottom of your viewfinder, you can see the arrow is -1, which is one stop. Okay, so just by moving from ISO 100 to 200, okay, we'll move that from one stop underexposed to a nigh perfect exposure. And if you went from then 200 to 400, by default on the same shutter speed and aperture settings, it would move it plus one stop overexposed. Okay, so the other things to control that. So if your lens was a 50mm f1.4, which is quite a popular fishing lens, if I went from open my aperture from f5.6 to f4, that's also the equivalent of one stop overexposure. So excuse me, I could have kept ISO 100 in that case and just dropped the aperture to f4, kept the shutter speed at 1/60th, and it would have done the same thing. So all of those corresponding fields work together to increase or decrease aperture. And my advice is go out in your garden, take loads of photographs, have a look at the meter, and just play, and fine incremental changes can really make a big difference.
And not only that, I suppose as well, when you're out, you've got to be so aware, typically in this country, how the weather can be changeable in seconds, kind of with the sun popping in and out from behind a cloud. I suppose that's where you have to be really on it, and that can make a difference. Sound advice again, and again, just that big thing about practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like you say, the beauty of a digital is you can do it. It's live, isn't it? You can have a look and tweak. I think we can cover so much on photography, but I just wanted to give like a very quick sort of overview for those that are just getting into it, and because it's so popular, and there does seem to be a big photography following in the fishing fraternity.
Absolutely, and particularly the last decade, there's been inspiring publications like Subsurface from Gaz Ferrum, and that's inspired other guys to go and buy a nice camera, take your images. They don't cost anything to take the image these days, you know. And my advice, equipment-wise, don't get het up all the time in changing to the latest camera. Invest money in lenses. Lenses are what make the real difference. And as frighteningly expensive as a Canon L series lens may be, the investment over years to come will pay you back if that's what you like. The second-hand market is great for both buying cameras and lenses. Wex Photographic. There's various companies out there that sell lots of stuff, and particularly where the mirrorless market has come in and moved very fast, which has caused a lot of people to change their equipment. You know, again, don't be governed in a fishing situation. Mirrorless isn't a real great advantage as a must-have. If I was talking wildlife photography, that would be a different conversation, because the focusing of the modern mirrorless is unquestionably of state of the art, and you can take photographs now that you couldn't take even 10 years ago. You know.
Let's cover a bit about that, because that's quite fascinating. I mean, if you're happy to. Obviously, I'm mindful of time. I know it's 12:42. You're right to carry on.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, great. Obviously that. I mean, because I've got mirrorless, haven't I? You've had a bit of play with that, so. And I think the beauty of them is the firmware updates as well. Like, because you've got a camera, and all of a sudden it's almost like it's the next spec, but they've just done the firmware. Because so much of it is the software, and like the focusing and the dual pixel autofocus.
Absolutely, and you know, if you look at some of the recent Canons, the R5s have had firmware update to, as well as the animal eye control focus. They've taken on the automotive eye focus, which is what was prevalent on the R3. You know, so again, these facilities to be upgraded via firmware as opposed to having to buy another camera. You know, is great, and you know, the next 5 years we'll see further developments, particularly Canon in the top end, but you know, Canon, Sony, Nikon, they're all great cameras, you know, and all have a supported range of lenses which will match every budget. But you know, lenses, you do get what you pay for.
Of course, it's eye-watering, but like you say, it's an investment, and you've got it for years and years, haven't you?
I mean, I've still got Canon L series lenses that I bought 15 years ago, and still use them. You know, on a
still
daily basis.
Brilliant.
Still unflawed.
Some absolute classics. So was your first Canon experience the first time you bought digital, or had you had them as film?
I was shooting Canon through print and slide, AE1 program, then a Canon A1, Canon F1, and then I moved when they brought their EOS. I had EOS 5, which had, funny enough, eye-controlled focusing at that time, something that was only used for that one camera. And I stuck on an EOS 5, multiple EOS 5s, worn them out, bought other ones for the duration up until my equipment was sadly taken.
And it's just a case of building. It's a bit like fishing kit, isn't it? I think you don't realise how much kit you've got until you sit down and tot up that value, and it can be quite eye-watering. I mean, I've made sure I've insured mine after having an incident with one of my drones when I was filming a netting project a couple of years ago. Did I tell you about that or not? Filming for Andy. Andy had a sort of lake over near Devizes, and it was about 4 degrees, so I thought it was fine to whiz up, but it's quite foggy. I just sent the drone up over him and he was shooting the net, and the drone was probably only up for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. A warning thing popped up on my phone, something like the DJI Mini 2. The warning popped up on the phone about when the motors had turned around, and it was only like a small lake, a few acres. Turned around to bring it back and didn't get back. It just fell out the sky. Someone started down plop. I was like, right, that's that then. They managed to get it back, like with the net. He got the net and dragged it back. Obviously, it was knackered by then. So after that point, I was like, right, get proper insurance. I managed to get like the old DJI Refresh to replace it, thankfully. And since, my latest one's been in the water, but I grabbed it out quickly and dried it. It's been fine. I got a bit distracted on the lake not far from it, doing a bit of filming, like in sport mode, and managed to whack myself in the head with it on a fly path. I sort of didn't react, and sort of froze, donked me on the head, bounced over, ended up in the water. It was only in the shallow mud, so ran in, grabbed it, whipped the batch out straight away and dried it. It was a sunny day and it's been fine, touch wood. Yeah, so insurance is an absolute biggie. Have you done much drone work, or is that
not done any drone work at all?
No. What about I know you love your wildlife, and I've seen some of your mega shots of the deer at Richmond and the rutting season, which I'd love to come with you on the next time. We've got
you have to come.
Talk to us a bit about that. How did that come about? Because I'd imagine, I suppose, being a Surrey lad, it was on your doorstep almost, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. I'd always wanted to take wildlife pictures, but never really had the equipment to do so, and I'd purchased my camera at the time, a Canon 5D Mark II, which is a great camera for fishing and landscape photography, but trying to focus on something that moves a lot. The success rate is minimal at best. And at the time, I wasn't shooting wildlife, but I was keen taking photographs of my son on his running. So I borrowed a 5D3, which gave me more success. And then I was had a Christmas present given to me of a 5D4, which was really my dream camera. And the focusing systems much more led to moving parts. So straight away, when I took photographs of Luke on the track and his pals, my success rate, hit rate was much more in tune, and that gave me then the platform. I bought a longer lens, 100 to 400 L series Mark II, and straight away the lens was upgrade. So I started to visit down the London parks, Bushy Park and Richmond, and loved it. It was just like a wildlife park, and getting as close, and close being like 100 metres for these big stags, and photographing, watching them, learning. It gave me a different element to my photography, particularly in the colder months, and that sort of continued now for the past sort of 4 or 5 years. I've got quite into bird photography, deers, wild boar, grass snakes, dragonflies. It's been a real extension of my angling.
Nice.
And again, a new subject to learn, technical. You get a longer lens, so you need a bigger tripod.
Working with a faster shutter speed, I suppose. Because that's obviously like the point that you mentioned about having a 50mm for cat shots. Obviously, with that longer lens, it just magnifies every movement, which means faster shutter. So
if I'm shooting 400mm, I've got to be using a minimum of 400th of a second as the rule. I mean, lenses do have image stabilisation, which is a godsend. So sometimes you can break the rules and come down, but there's a difference between breaking a rule and relying on the rule.
Of course. And I mean, the tripod kit can add up as well, can't it, cost-wise, when you sort of like the fluid heads and everything like that on them. But again, it's all an investment, isn't it? Because once you get a good one.
And one of best bits of advice I can give for your angling photography is invest in a decent tripod. Because if you're doing landscape work, I do all my landscape work tripod mount. You can start to do low shutter speed. So if you want to add movement on a wind picture with your rods or whatever, add wind, so dropping your shutter speed to a 15th of a second and shooting on a remote, and all of a sudden you get that nice wavy feel, but you wouldn't be able to do that handheld.
Why would you use a remote, just for those that don't know?
So because just touching your camera will induce camera shake into your image. So having it tripod mounted, and then either set the remote on your camera so that when you press the shutter speed it actuates 2 or 10 seconds later, or even better, a remote release that will often plug into your camera just to take that so you're not actually touching the camera. So that's good for slow-mo, slow shutter speed situations. Another good accessory to invest in is a flash gun. You know, for your night shots, don't go all LED panels. You know, the flash gun has the ability to talk to your camera, so your camera knows what it's got, which will assist focusing accuracy. A tripod will definitely improve your shots.
That's something I definitely need to spend more time learning, is the flash side of things, because I'm only sort of typically using it for night shots of fish, and it's something I need to dedicate a bit of time to. So I think it's just getting out and using it.
Perhaps we'll talk about a photography one on another session.
Absolutely. Definitely. I think there's more. There's definitely more to cover there. We'll do maybe a little mini series or something like that. That'd be really good. Okay, so if we sort of segue back to a bit of fishing, because I'd love to hear your Redmire story. That would be really nice. Or do you want to take a tea break and then we come back, or you're good to go?
I'm okay. Okay.
Let's hear that. How did that all come about? I know you said it was a really big dream to fish that.
Yeah. So one of my dreams was to catch a 20-pound common from Redmire and have the photograph taken on the dam. That was that was my lottery win, if you like. And so before I got the opportunity to fish Redmire, my next best thing was to catch a Redmire carp out of somewhere else, which is where the dream of catching the Redmire common from Ashley came about. And then latterly I wanted to fish Raisbury, because the Redmire commons that got stocked in Raisbury done very well, and that was an accessible venue. Sadly, the year I got my ticket for Raisbury was the year it was then later sold. But I digress. But the opportunity for fishing Redmire came around via the British Carp Study Group, and there was a weekend auction at our AGM fishing, and myself and my 4 or 5 friends, we pitched in and won the weekend. And subsequently, so we went to Redmire and had a great time. That was 12 years ago, 2010. And sadly, while we were there, one of my good friends, a guy called Steve Edwards, who was a former Redmire syndicate member, he passed away whilst we were up there. So that sort of dampened. But on the Sunday, I managed to catch a carp out of the Willow Pitch, which is where Walker caught Clarissa from in 1952. So I came away with a Redmire carp, albeit not a very big one. I think it was a common, about 14 pounds. But over the next few years, we outbid everyone at the AGM, and the same group of us went together on a yearly weekend trip. I caught fish, nothing big, but I caught most trips. But on one of the trips, one of the guys caught a 23-pound common, and it was just incredible. It was just incredible. And just this golden mahogany, and maybe try even harder.
Yeah.
And I was lucky the following year I managed 2 trips. I got offered another guest trip with somebody else, and I caught the famous common no pelvics out there and got a lovely shot on the dam.
Yeah.
My friend at the time he offered me the guest was ex-professional photographer, so he took some brilliant photographs.
Yeah.
And then I carried on with my normal bunch of pals, and then I think it was 2017, in the evening pitch. It was Pitchford's. I was Pitchford's, and that night I caught. First, I had a 18-pound fully scaled, so I was really pleased with that. That was my biggest mirror at the time. And then latterly, the early hours, I had a common of 21 pounds, and managed to get some really good shots on the dam, and then re-edited them in black and white. And my dream was down. That was, I think that might have been the last year I fished. I went back one more year actually. That was the last year I.
Just one. No, there was just one down there.
That was the dream fulfilled, and then obviously the really good work by Mark Walsingham and the team to drain Redmire and resculpture it.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So what? When was your final year on there?
I think 2017. I think I went back one year,
Quite recent.
2018. Yeah. And really from there, I went from Redmire to. I started fishing Ashmead.
Right.
Yeah. Sort of my final 2 years on Redmire.
Yeah.
I started another group of friends. We had a week on Ashmead. I fished Ashmead up until last year was and this year we're not going to Ashmead. We go to France instead.
Right. Yeah. How did you get on Ashmead?
Ashmead, I loved it. So again, the relationship, correlation, Ashley Pool, Redmire, Ashmead, 3 very, very similar waters. The fish, that small water syndrome where the fish are so aware of your presence.
Yeah.
And all 3 waters were identical in that. And Ashmead went for, I think, 5 years on the trots.
Yeah.
So again, always looked at if one of us caught a decent fish, it was a team effort rather than look at an individual, because you could never be successful all the time.
Yeah.
Part of a big part of the fish's behaviour was dictated by the angler's presence, or indeed if they moved. You could get anglers 2 or 3 move up in one corner and thereby create a void somewhere else, and within 24 hours those fish would move into that void. And obviously it wouldn't be conducive to good angling if the fish were just constantly on the move. So I like to sort of get a swim, and obviously draw dependent, and set my stool up for the long journey rather than the short one moving about. Probably my dream fish out of Ashmead was so there were 2 really, single scale, the big mirror, but the real icing on the cake for me was a common called JC's, and it had a big sloping head, a big cavernous mouth, and an overslung top, and I'd seen 2 or 3 photographs of it, and it's like, if I could have one carp, I'd have that one. And it was another dream come true really, because on my last trip, it was 2018, and we had our week on there the first full week of May, and it coincided with that weekend a music event in Liverpool.
Right.
That I wanted to see this DJ called Patrice Pomel. And I'd never seen him before. So literally arrived at Ashmead on the Friday, drew our swims, and on the Saturday I left to go to Liverpool for the weekend to see this DJ.
Yeah.
And had a great time in Liverpool on the Sunday. So just taking a step back, in unusual May weather, this was frosts and ice, plummeting to minus temperatures, so the conditions were absolutely abysmal.
Yeah.
But on the Saturday and the Sunday were the forecast the best conditions for the week.
Right.
Whilst I wasn't there. So sure enough, got a couple of calls and text messages. On the Sunday morning, there'd been a couple of fish caught to the guys.
Yeah.
I think two 30-pounders, and I think one of the guys had a 40-pounder as well.
Oh, wow.
So literally came back from Liverpool on the Sunday evening, back to Surrey. Surrey, got in the car, drove back to Ashmead, and I was like, I could hardly keep my eyes open. Literally got out of the car, went and prepped up my spots again that I'd prepped up just before I'd left, etc. Didn't bother fishing that night. Woke up to the inside of the brolly was all ice. I mean, it was like -2 or -3. On the Monday morning, got the rods out, and Monday lunchtime, I caught a small fish, 14, 15-pound mirror off memory. And then on the Tuesday, penultimate night before you finished on the Wednesday, I'd been baited up with liquidised corn.
Right.
So almost like a slop, of which I used to get a kilo of corn, blend it up through the liquidiser, and then I'd add an amino acid called lysine.
Yeah.
I'd add 3 to 5 grams of lysine. The sweet corn is also quite high in lysine as well.
Yeah.
But the idea being that I'd have extra attraction, and the slop being very little for the fish to feed on. So I'd feed by bait dropper down the margins, etc. So on the Monday I cast out, and my hook baits were homemade sweet corn type shaped hook baits, just to balance out as a wafter.
Yeah.
So I caught this 14s, that gave me the confidence, and also I was using my Abu Cardinal reels, one of which I'd constructed from spares in 1978. I made the whole reel from spares when Abu discontinued the reel. So I used to take them down Ashmead, and the only difference being that the reel had aluminium spools. There's a guy, Les Shaw, who makes these aluminium spools, because the existing Bakelite type spools were rubbish and had a history of exploding. So I've got 20-pound line, the Abu 55, Jim Gibbonson 12-foot 2.25 carbon rods, and I'm fishing literally 18 inches from the bank, 4 ounce on this clay slope. And then it was a Tuesday evening, I was just getting ready, Champions League semi-final, Liverpool.
Right.
And I thought we'd tune into that. There was a couple of Liverpool fans, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was just getting ready to settle down. I was cooking myself a meal, and then I heard this beep beep. And I've literally crept along this peninsula, and I've looked, and the rod tip, beep beep, the rod bobbin's at the top, and the rod tip is just bending over, nodding down to pick the rod up, and the water's exploding, literally foot from the bank. And I'm playing this fish, and it wasn't a big dogged fight at all, but it took a bit of line, and I turned it over on its back, saw it was a good fish, literally got it back in the edge and netted the fish, looked at it, thought that's a good comment, put the net in, run back to the car, grabbed my camera bag, and said to my friend Dan, "So do you want to round the others? I've got a good common." How big? I don't know. I've literally got it in the net, but we want to take photos before it gets dark. So literally, by the time I got back, I got the camera gear ready, flash gun, everything sorted out.
Yeah.
Camera on a tripod for one of the guys, right? Quick lesson, like just
Yeah.
use my camera,
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So we took this photograph, and by this time I still didn't know what I caught. So I just, literally, I picked the fish up out of the net, put it on the unhooking mat, thought that's a good fish. Anyway, unhooked it, lifted the fish up for the cameras. 3 or 4 photographs. One of the guys says, "Dave, that's your target. That's JC's." Like, wow. So anyway, we took the photographs, weighed it, and it was a new PB common at 42, I think, 42 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I managed to get some really good photographs. Yeah, we weighed it after we'd done the photographs, and highlight of my Ashmead sessions, and the one I wanted, and fair play to the guys that took the photographs for me, and yes.
Oh,
So
wow.
we celebrated after through the Liverpool. I think Liverpool qualified as well
Right.
for their Champions League final a couple of weeks later. So, and we got ourselves a great fish for all of us.
Yeah. Wow.
And worth all the effort, the journey to Liverpool,
Yeah.
the baiting up, and
Amazing. How far back were you? You said you were fishing literally 18 inches from the bank. Where were you bivvied up? Like way out of sight?
So I had 2 rods on the peninsula. So the rod tips were this on land, not
So you couldn't
not
see it.
over the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
18 inches out, then back leaded, then slack lined back, and then I was probably 8-10 metres away the other side of this area.
Right.
So you wouldn't go. No one would walk out onto
Yeah.
the peninsula because you're so close,
Yeah.
And I ended up with, I think I had one the next day just on pack-up time as well,
Right.
the same rod.
Same
all
message,
three,
yeah.
all 3, yeah. So 5 ounce, 6 ounce leads,
Yeah.
just rested on the clay. 'Cause
Yeah.
the clay was quite smooth, and little 4-inch, very stiff hook links,
Yeah.
35-pound boom hook links,
Yeah.
and these 2 pieces of corn wafted on a
Yeah.
size 6 wide gape, I think.
Yeah. So you mentioned obviously that bite with the big and with JC's. Do you think it was just trying to? It was on. It hooked. It was just trying to get rid of the lead.
Yeah, it was already hooked.
Yeah. With it, but obviously it was knew what was going on.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm a great fan of sharpening hooks as well.
Yeah.
And the hook was absolutely buried.
Yeah.
Buried to the eye.
Yeah, but the fact that it didn't bolt, it was like shit.
Yeah.
I've been done here.
Yeah.
Try and get rid of it quick before he clocks it. Yeah. Wow. What a capture. I'd love to see a photo of that one.
Yes. Yeah.
Be really good.
We'll sort one out for the podcast
I
or
was going to
something.
say that'd be good for the podcast. I think definitely to have that on the Instagram. So where do you see your sort of future over the next few years in terms of angling?
I mean, I'm still as keen now as I was 40 years ago, if I'm honest. I'm really, really keen. As long as I'm fishing for nice carp, nice surroundings with nice people, that's what's size. It hasn't got to be a 40 or a 50 pounder.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunate that I'm in a few venues, and some of them are very quiet because they're just not, they have lots of problems, predatory otters, etc. Or you just don't get many bites.
Yeah.
People go sometimes seasons without any bites. And, But I've got enough to keep my plate full, and I want to start to do more photography during the winter months, particularly wildlife photography. I want to carry on pursuing that, get better at that. I've got various photographs that inspire me already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I think I get just as much of a buzz nailing a real good shot as I do catching a big carp or a special carp. That feeling, it's. I think that's what keeps us coming back, isn't it? For sure.
And I've let me other species fishing in the winter, but pike, perch, chub, roach. They've taken a bit of a backseat the last sort of 10 years, and I want to do more of that in the winter in the rivers. I may even have a break from carp fishing for a while.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think nothing beats a decent perch, does it?
No.
I think I've said it before on the podcast. It's like the poster boy of British freshwater fish, isn't it?
There's always a saying that the perch is the biggest fish of all, and that's probably quite a true saying. Very impressive. I'm really into my chub fishing. Really into my chub fishing. So
where'd you go for that?
Mostly the rivers, the Hampshire Avon or the Dorset Stour, a little bit on the Bristol Avon.
Right.
But species that you can catch on many different methods. I really like touch ledgering with cheese paste.
Nice.
And at the other end, sprayed maggot, trotting, trotting a waggler or a heavy stick. That thump when you hook one. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Do you do much barbel or not?
A little bit of barbel, not as much. Again, the Bristol Avon's been savaged really over the years by the otters, so the population has gone down. So they're not as viable in numbers on some stretches that they were. Whereas the chub have ended up sort of being the otter dodgers,
right?
Quicker. But I enjoy both of them, but chub are my favourite over the barbel.
Yeah. Do you ever spin for them or anything like that?
I've caught them on plugs. I've caught them on live baits.
Yeah.
Dead baits. Quite a lot of dead baits, sardines.
Right.
Then cheese paste, boiling pastes, feedered maggots, floatfish maggots. That's probably the encompass of. You can catch chub on everything. Free-lining slugs in the summer months.
It's just gluttonous, isn't it?
Stalking them. Quite a tricky fish. They've got their wits about them. But the Dorset Stour and the Hampshire Avon is where the real big fish live. Thames is a little bit out of my radar.
Right.
Although, that might be an area that I give a bit of attention.
Yeah, a bit of everything there, isn't there? In the Thames, I suppose.
Maybe combine the Thames with some deer photography. I don't know.
A good shout, isn't it? Get a few spots going. And that's a really good shout. Obviously, that's done big species of everything, hasn't it, over the years?
Yeah, £20 barbel and certainly £8 chub.
I suppose if you're that close at Richmond Park, it sort of opens lots of potential spots, doesn't it?
Yes.
It sounds really exciting, mate. So we're sort of coming to the end of the podcast. Obviously, you're going to pack down a bit as well. Have you seen much this session? Has much happened? It's been quite quiet because it's been roasting hot, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been very quiet. Although I did have a tench last night that was probably erring on the side of around £10. So a big tench. This one was very quiet anyway.
The sun's come round now, so I'm starting to get hit by it. So we're up at there. We're approaching the term mark, but I think definitely what we'll do is look to get a few more recorded on the photography. We can maybe ask some people on Instagram what they'd like us to cover. We can do a little photography mini-series.
Yeah, that sounds a plan.
Yeah, good. Okay, right. And thank you very much for being the 100th guest, Dave.
And thank you very much for allowing me to come on your podcast. It's been a privilege and an honour, and I hope the listeners have gained something out of the podcast.
Yeah, they absolutely would have done. Right, all the best, and we'll speak to you soon.
Tight lines.